I'm sure I need not reiterate time and time again because, after all, you're my followers, which means you're just a little sharper than the average Joe. But for those of you who, for whatever reason, don't know this information, Halo Infinite is now confirmed to happen on Zeta Halo. I know, big shock. And for those of you who are particularly prolific in watching my content, you'll also be aware that I've covered the history of Zeta Halo in recent videos. However, Zeta Halo is a hell of an installation and has an extremely rich history in practically every sense of the word, and at one time or another has played host and been the backdrop to practically every faction of the Halo universe. During its rich and storied history, Zeta Halo has a plethora of secrets and mysteries that are yet to be resolved. It's true of practically every ancient installation that large swathes of the events that took place upon that installation have been lost to time and memory. And with Halo Infinite now being confirmed as being somewhat more of a platform than a standalone game, being the staging post for the next 10 years worth of content, it's entirely possible that some of these mysteries will be either hidden within the campaign and the open world nature of the game as kind of Easter eggs for the more learned of us regarding the lore, or indeed as entire storied sections of the narrative to come over the following decade. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today I've collated a list of 7 mysteries of Zeta Halo. Yes, 7 mysteries of Installation 07. We all know the storied history with the number 7, don't we? Yeah, okay, right, good. Well anyway, 7 mysteries, Zeta Halo, Installation 07. Let's get on with it. Mara is the lending name of a female Gigantopithecus. For clarity's sake, Gigantopithecus is an extinct genus of ape from the early to mid-Pleistocene of southern China. Gigantopithecus has traditionally been restored as a massive gorilla-like ape, potentially 200 to 300 kilograms, or 440 to 660 pounds when alive, and has been estimated at being up to 12 feet in height. Mara was noted at being amongst the last 5 of her kind, with their total numbers, even at their height, rarely reaching more than 1,000 individuals. Though she was noted at being the last of 5 of her kind at the time that the librarian indexed the species on Earth, she became the sole remaining individual of her kind when she was finally brought to Installation 07. She resembled a gorilla in general shape, except Mara was enormous, reaching around 3 meters in height when standing upright. Despite her size, she was noted to move relatively quietly and with remarkable grace and agility. Her face bore a closer resemblance to that of orangutans, with a wide face and sunken green eyes, and her body being covered in mainly black and dark reddish fur. She was fully sapient and capable of language. During the Master Builder Faber's takeover of Installation 07, she lived at the compound of the life worker known as Gene Mender Folder of Fortune, where she was kept hidden from the rest of the installation. It is interesting to note that Gene Mender was actually tasked with the extraction and storing of all of the minds of the ancient humans who carried the ancestral memories of the ancient warriors, where she would then convert their patterns into a virtual form and give them the opportunity to simulate a physical interaction via manifesting themselves as a hard light projection. Interestingly enough, this failed to deceive Mara, who instantly recognized them as simply projections, not real living beings, and at one point was the only physical living being in the Gene Mender's station. Shortly after the arrival of Chakos, Venevra and Gamalpar, the area experienced a power outage. Mara left the compound with Chakos, Venevra and Gamalpar, and were eventually accompanied by Ryza. Interestingly enough, Ryza and his people had known about and met Mara's species in the past, so Ryza could communicate with her. When the group eventually split up, Mara followed Venevra into a more desolate region, and eventually found themselves fatigued and malnourished. They were eventually found by Forerunner transport and taken to a facility that was overseen by Mendicant Bias. What ultimately came of Mara is completely unclear. Unless Mara was put into stasis, in all likelihood, she died a long, long time ago. So it is highly unlikely that we will ever encounter Mara on Zeta Halo. However, that's not to say that we might not come across her final resting place. It's already extraordinarily clear that ancient humanity once lived upon Zeta Halo. We've already seen ruins of human creations. The stone rings we saw during the Slipspace Engine demo are believed to be human constructs, which is also interesting because in the main menu screen of the gameplay demo, these stone rings seem to be glowing somewhat, almost as a form of portal network. If this is the case, then ancient humanity on Zeta Halo are much more advanced than the ancient humanity that had been devolved after their war with the Forerunners, and this may play into the idea of Librarian's special population of humans. Humanity was ultimately one of many species indexed and preserved by the Librarian during the conservation measure. While a primary population of humans were held on the Greater Ark, another population of hundreds of thousands of humans of over 120 varieties were ferried from Earth to Zeta Halo, where they were later exploited and experimented on at the hands of the Master Builder. This special population were imprinted with the essences of human warriors processed via the Composer after Charam Haka was full. As with most humans, these essences were kept dormant, but were ultimately designed to awaken at the right trigger points. It's entirely possible that some of these ancient humans' imprinted essences awakened during their time on Zeta Halo and allowed them to build technologies much more advanced than any other population of ancient humanity at that time. It's already confirmed that ancient humanity managed to build an entire city, and likely more than just one, on Zeta Halo, although they eventually fled that city when the Master Builder started abducting and experimenting on human specimens. Ancient humanity are one of the bastions of mystery within the Halo universe at the moment, and it's entirely possible during our time on Zeta Halo we will find many things left behind by that ancient form of our ancestors, and maybe even living individuals. I've covered the Primordial a lot in recent times, and we know that the Primordial has a rich history on Zeta Halo. But the mystery surrounding the Primordial, and the one I'm particularly interested in that may play a part in the gameplay of Halo Infinite, is where the Primordial was ultimately killed. The Primordial in its final moments was stored within a time lock, and when the Isodidact interrogated the Primordial, it gave answers that the Didact was not prepared for. The Isodidact then chose to run the time lock in fast forward, forcing the Primordial to experience billions of years of time in seconds, which ultimately disintegrated it into a powder. The interest here is twofold. The powder that the Primordial ultimately turned to seems to bear at least some descriptive similarities to the powder that the Flood first emerged in within the galaxy. It's entirely possible the Primordial could somewhat reform itself out of this powder, as the Primordial is closer to the precursors than the Flood that exist in the galaxy at the moment are. However, in the grand scheme of things, even if we come across the Primordial's final resting place during Halo Infinite's campaign, maybe we can explore the ring and find deep within the bowels of a facility on Zeta Halo a large chamber of sorts. The actual time lock the Primordial was within. I feel this particular area will be eerie and rather disturbing to be within, and it may even be quite interesting to see the events that took place in that chamber actually played through somewhat, either through holographic representation or even through Chief's now relatively evident connection to the domain. Nonetheless, I'd like to see whether the Primordial is still there in some regard, or even just the empty sarcophagus it was forced to experience billions of years within. Mendicant Bias has as much of a rich history with Zeta Halo as the Primordial itself. What's particularly interesting is that at the end of the conflict of Installation 07, Mendicant Bias was disassembled and its parts were scattered throughout the Ecumene for further study. These parts were later reassembled as the Flood took over larger and larger portions of the galaxy, thereby bringing Mendicant Bias back into action. However, ultimately, Mendicant Bias fell to Offensive Bias, and was once again broken into pieces for further study. Parts of Mendicant's core have since been rediscovered. We know that one piece was still on the Ark, we know that another piece existed within the key ship at the centre of High Charity, and we know that when these were brought together they reunited. However, there's still a distinct possibility that a part of Mendicant Bias's core may still exist on Zeta Halo, buried somewhere on the ring, and it may be on the agenda that that part of Mendicant Bias is rediscovered. The Palace of Pain, contrary to popular belief, is actually multiple Flood research facilities across the ring. Following the end of the Human-Forerunner War, the Master Builder Faber used these facilities to ascertain as to whether or not the humans actually did have an immunity to the Flood. It ultimately turned out that the Flood could simply choose whether to infect a being or not, and this supposed immunity was just as a consequence of the Flood choosing not to infect humanity. After its release, the Primordial, with Mendicant Bias in its service, took over these facilities and began experimentation on humans with the Flood for what seemed to be just their own enjoyment. These facilities were numerous and spread across the ring, and as such it is more than likely that at some point in the future we will come across these facilities on Zeta Halo, and it will be interesting to see if new outbreaks will happen as a consequence of this, or if they'll just ultimately stand as silent epitaphs to the horrors that were seen there. Terminals have long played a very important part of Halo's narrative. It's allowed us access to peripheral information about the extended universe. It is likely that terminals will exist on Zeta Halo and we will be able to access them. The stories they tell are ultimately unknown at this stage. However, there's one long-standing mystery that still has yet to be answered. The Master Builder Faber left the installation shortly after the Primordial was brought to Zeta Halo. It was soon after this that Mendicant Bias was subverted by the Primordial, and the AI eventually broke safeguards in the ring's various Flood containment facilities, which allowed Flood outbreaks to spread across sections of Zeta Halo. Following this, Zeta Halo was considered missing for 43 years. No one knows if it went anywhere, and if it did go somewhere, where it went. No one really knows what events took place during those 43 years, and it's a rather considerable part of its history that is entirely absent. It would be nice to finally discover some information about those hidden 43 years. And a final interesting piece of mysterious lore is that within the Flood containment facilities on Installation 07 are 10 ProtoGrave Mines. ProtoGrave Mines, if you are unfamiliar, are also known as brain forms. We encountered one on the bridge of a Covenant ship on Installation 04 in Halo CE. These are the very early stages of coordinated intelligence for the Flood. The combined biomass of 10 ProtoGrave Mines is likely enough to make a full-fledged Gravemind. This would be a cataclysmic situation to encounter while on Zeta Halo during Halo Infinite. However, I don't necessarily believe that 343 Industries would play that hand of cards all at once. Bear in mind that Halo Infinite is supposed to be a platform for the next 10 years of content, and there just so happens to be 10 ProtoGrave Mines. It may just be coincidence, but it seems quite interesting that Halo Infinite is now said to be open world, and it's supposed to also be a platform for the next 10 years of content. You have to consider that Halo Infinite as a platform is going to need content, it's going to need story for the next 10 years. Much like Destiny with its world events, with new content being released on a semi-annual basis, is it possible that Halo Infinite is going to go in roughly the same direction? It's also interesting that Joseph Staten has now jumped back aboard with Halo after spending a good few years with Bungie and Activision creating Destiny. They effectively have 10 ProtoGrave Mines lined up and in theory ready to be released every year for the next 10 years as kind of a flood infection world event. I'm not saying for absolute guarantee that that's what's going to happen. I'm not declaring to have any insider knowledge as to exactly how things are going to play out. It just seems convenient that they have the following 10 years of content apparently planned out and ready, and they also just so happen to have 10 ProtoGrave Mines written into the very lore of Zeta Halo. It would line up quite well to have one of these accidentally or indeed purposefully released every year for the next decade. It could be at different times, they can mix it up, they could change the level of infection and infestation, but ultimately 10 ProtoGrave Mines, 10 years. It's just a little bit too convenient. Halo Infinite has been delayed, but we are still receiving new dribs and drabs of information with the return of old faces back to the Halo franchise, with small information drops from toy releases and community updates and other content drops. Halo Infinite may have been pushed back, but we are now solidly within Halo Infinite's marketing campaign. As time goes on, we will only find out more information about the particulars of Halo Infinite. 343 have done remarkably well at keeping much of the storyline for Halo Infinite utterly secret, but there's still so much within the lore that perhaps we need to be taking a closer look at in preparation for what is to come. Halo Infinite is now a platform. It's going to be the next 10 years of Halo. 10 years is a long time for a storyline to evolve. We need to be looking at the past, so we're better prepared for the future. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below. I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons Neek, the Silent Cartographer, Brian, Sebastian, Red Sea, Darian, Stalker of the Realms, Falcon X003, Alvin, Mr. Fell, Flaming Halo, The Revanche, Starlight, Viking and Legions Lost, the Holders of the Mantle, my Glorious Reclaimers, my loyal Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. You guys are awesome and all of this wouldn't be possible without you. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all major social media channels including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more of my time for me to put into this content and other Halo related goodness. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.